Here we'll be talking about how to construct a histogram. A histogram is a type of graph that looks a little bit like a bar graph, but it's actually a different type of graph. The first thing we need to do in constructing a histogram is give it a title, and this rule applies for all graphs. Second, label the y-axis with frequency, then place the class marks on the x-axis and label it with the appropriate units. 3. Draw bars for each class, with their height being the class frequency. 4. Make sure the bars are touching. And this is one important difference between a histogram and a bar graph. With a bar graph, the bars are not touching, and you can make bars for separate categories. For histograms, your bars have to be for ranges of data, and they do have to be touching. In this example, let's construct a histogram for the data in the last example. So let's take a look at the data in the last example for a minute. Okay, so now that we have this again, we can begin to construct our histogram. So we need to give ourselves a y-axis and an x-axis. Our graph needs a title, and the data we had were exam grades, so we could just title it exam grades. Now we can label our x-axis with appropriate units. In this case, it would be a grade. If we're dealing with heights, this might be inches or feet or centimeters. If we were dealing with something else, we would want to label it with whatever units are appropriate over here. Our y-axis is going to be frequency, so we can put an F here for frequency, or we can write out the word frequency. Now we need to label our x-axis with the class marks. Our lowest class mark was 44.5, so we'll put that here. We can put a squiggly line like this over here. This is something called a break. We would just use this because we don't want to count all the way from 0 up to 44.5. So that's just a way of skipping space. So we have 54.5. So now we've put all of our class marks on the x-axis, and for our frequency, we can count up by ones because our highest class frequency is 7. If we had a higher frequency for one of the classes, we might want to use a larger scale. Now we'll go back to our information here to see what the frequency of each class is. For a class mark of 44.5, our frequency was 1. So that's going to be the height of the bar for that class. Our next class has a frequency of 2. So its bar will have a height of 2. Next class has a frequency of 4. The next class had a frequency of 7. The next class had a frequency of 4. And the next class had a frequency of 2. And then our last class over here had a frequency of 0, so we wouldn't draw a bar there. And the same thing would be true if any of these classes had a frequency of 0, it wouldn't get a bar, and that would be the only instance where you might have 2 bars in a histogram not touching, if you have one class that has a frequency of 0. So right now we've done everything we needed to do, and the graph of our histogram is complete.